Hey YouTube, what's up? There's a question that keeps coming up in the comments. Which software do you use to edit your images? Answer, Lightroom. Well, now you know, but I always had in 19% of cases. But what about the 10% left? When is Lightroom not enough? Let's see that in less than 5 minutes. What's the difference between Lightroom and Photoshop? Briefly, Photoshop is an image editing software, whereas Lightroom is a photo development software. Photoshop over time has become this huge thing that allows you to combine and merge images, what we call compositing. Whether you do graphic design, web design, 3D, video, you will use Photoshop at some point. Lightroom is specific to photo work only.
The other major difference is encapsulation. In Photoshop, you edit a native Photoshop file in which you embed your images. Erasing your photos afterward on your hard drive will not change the PSD file, where all pixels have been encapsulated. So you have very large files, but they contain all the elements that make it up.
Lightroom does not encapsulate, but indexes the changes made. Small reminder, RAW is not an image format. It is the raw data from your sensor that some software are able to interpret and represent visually.
What you modify are parts of the code that constitute this data. That's why you can make so many virtual copies of the same image in Lightroom without doubling the weight. Since you're not recreating anything, you're just modifying some data differently, but you don't change anything from the original file. Lightroom is the fusion of Camera Raw, Photoshop's RAW processing engine, and Bridge, an Adobe version file organizer. Lightroom is an accumulation of tools specifically for photographers and only photographers. First, you will import and organize your images in the library module, and then you will process them in the develop module.
The colorimetry tools, distortion tools to straighten perspectives, or skin retouching tools are largely sufficient and much more accessible than in Photoshop, which is more powerful, yes, but you don't need to take a SpaceX rocket every time you go out to buy your food at the local grocery shop. That would be cool, I know. So if everything you need as a photographer already exists in Lightroom, what's the point of Photoshop? Two things, the power of compositing with layers, and all the tools to recreate matter are more advanced than in Lightroom.
The spot removal tool here has two modes. The first one is a cloning tool. You only duplicate an area of your image as it is, while the other one recreates matter based on a pixel sample from a given area. Very effective, but not as magical as the content-aware tools you have in Photoshop. Let's see how I worked on the images from the previous vlog with Claire and the photo backdrops. I had planned to do this tutorial, so I left the folding lines to show you how to remove them in post-prod. Of course, I only wanted to do it for the first backdrop, but since I'm an idiot, I remembered it only at the end. So, save yourself some work. If you're working with fabric backdrops, take the time to give them a little ironing beforehand. Once I'm satisfied with the overall edit of my image, I will right-click and ask to edit it in Photoshop. Well, I admit that in this case, it's quite simple. I mostly use the clone stamp tool, the same way you could do it in Lightroom, yes. To define the area to duplicate, hold Alt, click with the target the area you want to clone, and with a soft brush, you paint the area you want to replace. The advantage is that you can do this on a separate layer and manage the editing step much more precisely. To do this, make sure that the sampling is done on the current layer and below in the corresponding menu in the taskbar. It is the same thing for the recreation matter tools here. First of all the healing tools, similar to the Lightroom tools, which are generally used to remove small imperfections on the skin, etc. I also like the patch tool because you can choose the calculation mode.
Normal just averages the imported pixels. Content-aware tries to really recreate elements of the image.
Let's take this opportunity to see how content-aware works, even if it's a bit overkill in such a simple case. I'll go to the layer I want to modify, then I will select an area. Right-click and Content-aware fill. Here it's very simple. The area in green is the zone it uses for its calculation. If an element appears in the result that you don't want, just erase it with the brush. If on the contrary you want to add an area, hold on the Alt key, you see that the little sign inside the brush changes from minus to plus, and paint the concerned area. Make sure that the output is on a new layer and then just click OK.
In our case with this photo shoot, to give an even more smooth effect on the background, on some images I used a filter on it. I used a particular blur called the surface blur. It's a bit like spreading the material since it's a blur that is applied without affecting the edges of the elements, which remain sharp. I'll show you.
First, I'm going to flatten all the layers of my image on a separate layer with the shortcut Shift-Ctrl-Alt-E. Then we go into Filter, Blur, Surface Blur. Here I put a very large radius, in our case 50. You see what that can do? We used to use this filter a lot for skin retouching before. Obviously we are not going to leave it like that. We're going to apply a mask, erase everything by filling it with black, and then with a big soft white brush, I'm going to paint only the background. If the effect is still too pronounced, you just have to lower the opacity of the layer.
In the end, I use Photoshop to recreate complex materials. For example, remove a car in a background or a really annoying element. And honestly, I only do it in professional projects. For the vlogs, I have the policy to avoid retouching as much as possible to offer you a result quite close to the real photo shoot with the drawback. And also to avoid spending a lot of time editing the photos in order to offer you these wonderful videos as often as possible. By the way, I let you go and watch the vlog with Claire for all the details about the photo shoot. It was a fun one. And here you have another video, but I don't know what yet. See you, mate. Keep on creating.